Okay, I think it's on now. So I just wanted to say this because I hear a lot of anti talk about what the feminist movement has done for women, and especially some of the women who don't fully understand. And I'll break it down really quickly. Do you like driving your car? Thank you to the feminist movement. Do you like being able to buy a car? Thank you to the feminist movement. Do you like the ability to buy a home without having a man um, be the landlord, the whatever, the homeowner? Do you like being able to go to the bank and buy a home? Thank you to the feminist movement, because prior to the feminist movement, women were not even allowed to own land. They were not allowed to own any possessions, basically. Prior to the feminist movement, women were the possession. So I wanted to bring that up. A lot of women need to be thanking the feminist movement for the smallest things that they have, that if it wasn't for the feminist movement, they wouldn't have it. They would not be able to do it. So let me get into this. So, the feminist movement, also known as the women's movement or simply feminism, refers to a series of political campaigns for reforms on issues such as reproductive rights, domestic violence, maternity leave, equal pay, women's suffrage, sexual harassment, and sexual violence, all of which fall under the label of feminism. And the feminist movement, the movement's priorities vary among nations and communities and range from opposition to female genital mutilation in one country to oppositions to the glass ceiling in another. The feminism in part of the Western world has gone through three waves. First wave of feminists was oriented around the station of middle or upper class white women and involves suffrage and political equality. Second wave feminism attempted to further combat social and cultural inequalities. Although the first wave of feminism involved mainly middle class white women, the second wave brought in women of color and women from other developing nations that were seeking solidarity. Third wave feminism is continuing to address the financial, social, and cultural inequalities and excludes renewed campaigning for greater influence of women in politics and media. In reaction to political activism, feminism have also had to maintain focus on women's reproductive rights, such as the right to an abortion. Feminism in China started in the 20th century with the Chinese Revolution in 1911. In China, feminism has a strong association with socialism, a class issue, and some commentaries or commentators believe that this close association is damaging to Chinese feminism and argue that the interests of party are placed before those women. Let's see. Just a minute. Actually, let me do this. So I can see if there's anybody in the chat. Just a minute. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Abigail Smith Adams, January 1st, 1777. The original 13 states passed laws that prohibited women from voting. Abigail Smith Adams, wife of John Adams, the second president, and mother of John Quincy Adams, the sixth president, wrote that women will not hold ourselves bound by any laws which we have no voice. Hannah Adams, January 1st, 1784. Hannah Adams was first American women to support herself by writing. Um, and Rebecca Lukens, in January 1st, 1825, Rebecca Lukens took charge of the Brandywine Iron Works, a company that produced iron for the boilers and hulls of ships and for rail cars and rails. Let's see. So, because of feminism, a lot of these women in the feminist movement were able to accomplish things that initially in society was they could not do. Women could not do. One, this one, let me see. Let me go back. First public high school for women in January 1st, 1826. First public high school for girls opened in New York and Boston. Maria Mitchell, in January 1st, 1847, Maria Mitchell, an American astronomer, discovered a comet. She became the first woman member of the American Academy of Arts and Science in 1848. Okay, here's one. Everybody always talks about Harriet Tubman. So Harriet Tubman, January 1st, 1850. Harriet Tubman helped more than 300 slaves reach freedom through the Underground Railroad. Let me continue. So basically, this is just showing a lot of the things that women have contributed to society, especially American society. Let me see. Let me see here. Mhm. Just a minute. Okay, here we go. So, timeline for women's legal rights, other than voting, represents formal changes and reforms regarding women's rights that include actual laws reformed as well as other formal changes, such as reforms through new interpretations of laws by precedents. For such things, only the United States see timeline of women's legal rights. In the United States, other than voting, rights to vote is exempted from the timeline for that right. See timeline of women's suffrage. So it says timeline of women's legal rights in the United States other than voting. Here we go. Women's legal rights in the United States other than voting represents formal legal changes and reforms regarding women's rights in the United States that include actual laws, reforms Let me see, as well as other formal changes, such as reforms through new interpretations of law precedents. I read that already. Why did it take me back there again? I don't know. So here's something: 10 things that American women could not do before 1970. So basically, before the second wave feminism. It says not own their own home or even go to a pub. They could not sit on a jury or refuse to have sex with their husband. We learned all this in Irish Central Charming Post. It says, and they were made, and that made us wonder what were things like for women in America. So I guess this is in Ireland. Let me continue. It says, so while we still have a long way to go to secure total equality for women, let's take a moment to celebrate how far we've come. Before the 1970s, and American women could not, one, keep her job if she was pregnant, two, report cases of sexual harassment in the workplace, three, be acknowledged in the, I don't know, this is crazy. Apparently, they weren't allowed to be in sports. Four, get a credit card. Five, refuse to have sex with her husband. Six, compete as a boxer in the Olympics. Probably a lot of other things that she couldn't do in the Olympics. Seven, get a divorce with some degree of ease. Eight, celebrate International Women's Day. This is crazy. I don't know why that's part of this. Sounds stupid. Nine, have legal abortion in most states. Okay, whoever wrote this article needs an ass whooping. It's very inconsistent. Hmm. Okay, so it says globally, women own less land and have less secure rights over land than men. Land and agrarian reforms allocated and titles or registration programs often target the household or assign ownership to the head of the household, most frequently defined as a man. Okay, let me continue. In 2012, the World Bank published a report on women, business, and the law, which said UN, the United Nations Office focused on women's issues, informed us that women perform 66% of the world's work, produce 50% of the food, but earn 10% of the income and own 1% of the property. Wow. What did the Married Women's Property Act do? The Married Women's Property Act in 1882 was an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom that significantly altered English law regarding the property rights of married women, which, besides other matters, allowed married women to own and control property in their own right. What was the Married Women's Property Act right? The Married Women's Property Act of 18. Hey, Neon Eyes, how are you? Um, It's the Married Women's Property Act in 1848 is one of the most important property laws enacted in American history. It became the template for the laws passed in other states that allowed women to own and control property, such as such property was protected from seizure or any other action by any creditor of her husband's. Why is the right to property important? The most important protection afforded to the individual by law is the protection of his property. That property provides individuals a protection domain against the state. The rich and powerful contrive to protect their property, even when a weak rule of law fails to protect property rights for the general population. Who started the Married Women's Property Act? It says the Married Women's Property Act helped to rectify some of the difficulties that women faced under under coverture, the British common law system that subsumed married women's ability to own property, wages, enter into contracts, and otherwise act autonomously to their husband's authority. So this just kind of goes into that. I wanted to get a lot of the notes down and do this earlier, but I was out with my daughter, so I never got a chance to do this quite as quite as efficiently as I wanted to do. Oh, this is interesting. Hey, Big J. Oh, thank you, Big J. It says women own less than 20% of the world's land. It's time to give them equal property rights. It says a woman holds her son as she stands in her doorway in Nairobi, um, Kibera slum. It says most of us would consider our home as the ultimate sanctuary. It's the place that we make our own and guard from others a safe space for our families. And we may worry over the cost of rent or buying our home. We may struggle to maintain it, but we don't lie awake at night in constant fear of being evicted because someone else is claiming ownership of it. We're lucky. An estimated 1 billion people living across some of the world's mega cities don't have any rights over the property or land they live on. From the slums of Canta, God, I can't even say this, Cantagalo in Rio to Kibera in Nairobi, multiple generations of people are being governed by an underworld of illegal networks, a para economy run by gangsters who they rely on to supply services they would otherwise not have access to because of their status. The implications are huge and have a ripple effect on everything from health and well being to conflicts and violence. Think about it. Without property to use as collateral, you are less likely to borrow money from respectable lenders, governments, and corporations are less likely to pay for infrastructure and basic services if ownership is unclear and the stability of the whole community is at risk. how women are left behind. Security and ownership of land is critical to social and economic empowerment. Yet, this is an area full of paradoxes. Just try to put some of these numbers into perspective. Land and property can form up to 75% of a nation's wealth, yet three-quarters of the world's population cannot prove they own the land on which they live or work. In fact, 90% of all Africans' land is still completely undocumented. This vacuum of rights affects women the most. It is the most widespread in South Asia and the Middle East, North African region, in Menta in particular. An estimated 25 million urban women lack equal constitutional and statutory property rights. Country-specific data also offers striking insight. Take Uganda. Here, the proportions of men owning land is 21% higher than the proportions of women. Traditionally, women do not have land rights independently. Secure land rights for women depend on the strength of the relationship with their husband's family and clan. However, moreover, 20 years of conflict has impacted on this, and as a result, women face a huge struggle to enforce their rights to land. Women own less than 20% of the world's land. A survey of 34 developing nations by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization puts that percentage as low as 10. This is staggering if you consider that half of the world population is women. More than 400 million of them farm and produce the majority of the world's food supply, yet female farmers lack equal rights to own land in more than 90 countries. A powerful economic catalyst. For women in particular, land and property ownership marks the end of economic uncertainty, vulnerability, and has a potential impact on the entire community. Women invest 90% of their income in their immediate families, and when they own their property, they have more power over household decisions. Food security is enhanced, and prospects are greatly improved for their children and future generations. Recent research even suggests that security and ownership of land decrease the risk of domestic violence. For some women, because economic independence means they are empowered to leave an abusive relationship. The UN Sustainable Development Goals reflects the importance of women's rights to land and property, setting a specific target for equal rights to ownership and control over land by 2030. Many nations, particularly in the developing world, have introduced progressive new laws to enshrine gender equality into land ownership. For example, in Kosovo, where female ownership hovers at around 15%, the lack of land title systems in the wake of the war break up the Yugoslavia have left the vast majority of women without proof of land and property ownership. Here, work is being done to build a new system of titling which will extend documentation to women. But the reality is, even when changes in legislation take place, there is still a huge gap between the laws and customs in certain parts of the world. In more than half of all countries, patriarchal traditions and ancient social beliefs threaten women's land rights, even when they are enshrined in the rule of law. Take Bangladesh, for example. While the country's statutory laws give men and women equal rights to purchase and own land, in practice, this is limited by inheritance rules that are governed by Sharia law, which place women and girls at a huge disadvantage. My nose is getting clogged up. Recent figures show that in 34 countries, daughters do not have equal inheritance rights as to sons. And in 35 countries, widows are particularly vulnerable as they do not automatically inherit their dead husband's property. It may go to his family or to their sons. It's one thing to move legislation forward, but quite another to change customs and beliefs. Land and property rights are the ultimate human right, and in the hands of women can act as a powerful economic catalyst. And that, I'm going to end on that note, because that was enough said. So everybody have a good night.